I'm delighted once again to be joined by Anna Danylchuk, who's been creating a war diary since the early days of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia in 2022. As many of you will know, Anna aims to tell the truth about Ukraine and Russia's war of aggression. Her incredible content cuts through the noise and the propaganda. She is also, as it happens, an expert on dissecting Russian propaganda and troll activity. I'm sure we will touch upon that in today's conversation. Anna is passionate about the beauty and independence of her country and communicates this powerfully in her videos in a clear and honest way. And before we get into this, I have to say as well, we're putting some links in the video. Please, of course, do subscribe to Anna's channel, but also look at the various fundraisers that are going on. And I think we can touch upon that in the video and why that is so important. Please do buy Anna a coffee to help her do the incredible work that she does. And once you've done that, maybe consider buying me one as well. That really helps at this time to help expand the content that we're producing to support Ukraine and to counter Russian nonsense. Anna, welcome to the channel.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. And I love this tradition. When we meet with your beautiful community, congratulations on reaching more than 100,000 friends and people who want to know more about this part of the world, which is extremely important in our times. I'm very grateful to know that there are so many smart, intellectual people that follow your updates, and I'm honored to be among the best of the best guests.
I absolutely look forward to these conversations. I think so many ideas come out of these, and those ideas, I now figured out these ideas are then used by other people in the community to help inform their content, to help give sort of power and impact of what they're saying as well. So I think these are an incredible source of information, not just for the audience, but for other creators and activists as well. So thank you. Thank you for everything you do. Well, let's start with the big news. And that is, and I can tell you've got a smile on your face there. You know, there's not always things to be feel cheerful about. And sometimes we've had these goals, for instance, after the bombing of the Children's Cancer Hospital in Kiev. Sometimes it's very difficult to look for any positives on a given day. But Kursk is something else. How has this changed the mood amongst not just civilians, but also military people as well in Ukraine?
It definitely changed the mood, incredibly. It was something totally unexpected and unpredictable. And I think one of the reasons of the success of this special military operation of the Ukrainian Armed Forces to Kursk region is this level of secrecy when no one expected something is going to happen. That's why when now we hear that there will be more surprises from the Ukrainian intelligence and soldiers, we feel even more excited. I think that's a genius decision. And when I look at the multiple results that this operation brings us, what it demonstrates to the world and those people who still considered, and I will use past simple, considered Russia a superpower, I do think this is a very decisive moment in the course of Russia's war, especially when it is finally back home to Russia where it belongs. And for all those people who doubt, just have a look. Russia was ready to continue this war for decades on the side of Ukraine, in Ukraine, destroying Ukrainian infrastructure, killing Ukrainian children. Literally, no one in Russia felt it that close. They have their propaganda, they got used to miserable life, they are not active as citizens, so they could continue for decades. With war on the Russian side, the moods and attitudes will change dramatically. So it is also an illustration of how easy you can walk through Russian borders. It is an illustration that they are totally unprepared to defend themselves, and the image of the Russian army is fake. And you know this is a very old kind of joke when our subscribers often say that Russian army is not the second strongest in the world, but in Ukraine. And now there is an upgrade of this joke that it turns out that the Russian army is the second strongest army in Russia too, after the Ukrainian. So I'm sure we will discuss lots of important results that this action will bring to us, but we are very happy. And I know that soldiers, especially those who are on the front lines, especially those who stay in trenches for months defending really small but important territories in Ukraine. And you know that this war to some extent resembled the First World War, the trench war, the positional war. It's extremely exhaustive. And now they have this injection of joy and confidence. And I believe lots of people dream to visit Kursk region as Ukrainian soldiers. Now we may officially say, yes, there are good people in Russia. They are Ukrainian Armed Forces. And I have recently watched the video of a Ukrainian journalist visiting Kursk settlements controlled by the Ukrainian Armed Forces. And I was smiling because she was constantly smiling. She was so happy to be there. So perhaps, of course, we are happy. We are also proud that Ukrainian army demonstrate the standards of war and the way we treat people. We give them humanitarian aid, we talk with them, and even those who support Russia may clearly see that no civilian objects are destroyed, and it's only about getting military objects that are used to destroy Ukraine and taking control over some villages, and people even saying like, okay, we don't mind. Maybe if you take good care of us, we can be Ukraine.
And it's really interesting. I mean, there's so many different angles to explore there, but I'm going to start with, I think, one which might take people a little bit by surprise, because we know that there are many Russians who are brainwashed by propaganda, and, you know, they have a view of the country they're living in, which is so different to the reality of that country. And of course, there are going to be people who are taken in by that. But my experience tells me there are a lot of Russians who actually understand that the Ukrainian army is not a threat to them. They actually understand and have a deeper memory of the Soviet Union. And I think they will understand that the threat to their own personal safety comes much more from their own Russian army. If they come into contact with their own troops, their own conscripts, they're far more likely to be abused, to have their houses looted, to also be raped by their own troops, for instance. I think there are many older Russians who might actually understand this, might have a better understanding of how their country functions, and have complete distrust for their fellow. I won't even call them citizens, because you can't really describe Russians as citizens. They're just people inhabiting a location who happen to have shared delusions and myths. But that seems to me that some of the reaction has been incredibly passive, as you see, you know, Ukraine rolling through these towns and villages. You don't see people sort of rising up in the way the Ukrainians resisted the Russian invasion. It's almost a complete, I won't even call it apathy, but it's, you know, it's a passivity, which I think is somewhat shocking. But deeper down, it may be that they understand at some level that Ukrainian soldiers are not a threat to their safety.
Well, definitely, I think they understand that the Ukrainian soldiers are not a threat to their safety. Many maybe will see how civilized and different we are. And I'm not saying that because I'm arrogant, but because I've experienced what Russian soldiers do during these 2.5 years of war. And, you know, indeed, the rules of war are important. We always have to try to avoid wars, but even if a war is fought, it has to follow some rules. And it actually tells a lot about the nation that fights against you. And Ukrainians, being like normal citizens, global citizens, open to the world, were devastated to see how bad things are actually in Russian army, in the way they treat human life. I don't know, crucify dogs, if we're taking something lighter out of all war crimes that they did. And I love it how many say that after Ukrainian army leaves some territories, you will never witness something we saw in Bucha or Irpin. And the world, by the way, also knows that, not only Russians. That's why I hope it will also influence the way global leaders make decisions, not equating Russia and Ukraine. But I still think that the reason why Russians do not oppose the advances of the Ukrainian armed forces inside their regions is not because they trust Ukrainians, but because they are so demoralized, weak. They just like, you know, that Vlad Vexler often speaks about depolitization of Russians. It was needed for Putin. Now somehow he needs to politicize them. But in the result, we have this totally, I don't know, in Ukrainian we may say transparent, but that's a good word. I mean, people who are not capable of doing anything. They are just sad, miserable observers. And one of the main things that shapes a society is the ability to organize. And that's what you very vividly see in Ukraine, and one of the reasons why we survive all of these Russian attacks. Starting from Orange Revolution, Revolution of Dignity, you can see how ordinary Ukrainians organize in hours, not in days, and create really working systems, volunteering, defense, and so on. And I do remember going out on the street on the 24th of February, early in the morning. And I saw first military cars everywhere, people wearing military, but not uniform. They were wearing everything. They had like military at home. And the very first night, we had patrol groups all around the city, made of people just like me. They were introduced really quickly how to look for mines, because we were afraid they will put in some places, and there were actually mines. People were introduced how to do basic things, because once again, you cannot, like, army cannot control all of the country at the moment, or some things happen, and in times of war, this backup from the civilians is vital. In 2014, Ukrainian people created the Ukrainian Armed Forces, because during these decades of independence, we were severely demilitarized, pacified, plus the old school army, they were training with Russians, they were friends with Russians, they had like similar doctrine. For them, it was, I know lots of good generals, officers who were very like Soviet officers, and many of them like started fighting well for Ukraine. But in 2014, they had huge psychological, I don't know how to say it, like it's not a stress, but like when something major breaks inside. And many of them were saying to these Ukrainian volunteers who were joining them, who wanted to learn how to, I don't know, drive a tank or use a gun machine, they were saying, never in our life we could imagine fighting with Russia. We were always thinking about the West and other things, but it was really difficult for them. That's why it's so good that many totally free, totally different people joined the Ukrainian Armed Forces. And I remember the first photos of Ukrainian soldiers wearing, oh my God, this rubber slippers or something, because they were literally doing it with what they can. They did not have normal uniform. They did not have drones, anything. And it was all bought by ordinary Ukrainians. That is, by the way, one more thing that many forget when they want to describe a country, Ukraine, that constantly asks for money. People, you cannot imagine how much money monthly every Ukrainian donates or buys. Like, first of all, we donate official state as initiatives, but we also back up our relatives, our friends. And I have a tradition, whenever I come across something on Facebook, for example, and I know a person and they are asking for something, I will never scroll down. I will donate depending how much money I have left till the end of the month or something, but I will always respond. And this is huge. You know, I'm working on the book that hopefully will explain something more about Ukraine, our history and our present. But I was trying to find the numbers of how much money Ukrainian people have donated since the start of the full-scale invasion. And it is almost impossible because there are lots of funds and they have like billions of maybe already dollars, not just hryvnias. And like it's very common to celebrate birthday and to collect money for something. When you get I don't know, when you win something, when you are awarded something, that's the way. And when nothing happens. It is also the way we react when, for example, they target children's hospital. There is even a saying that you have to transform your fury into donations, because that's the way you back up and you fight back, not with destructive anger. And I remember these people on the streets. I remember lots of photos of Ukrainian people wearing machine guns and walking with their children, protecting Kyiv, protecting all the other cities. And this is what actually stopped the advance of the Russian troops. There were thousands, if not millions, of Ukrainians doing that. And you remember those old ladies shouting something to the tanks. And in Russia, we do not see that at all. And this is the illustration how degraded their social life is, how they don't care about anything, how they are actually demotivated. I feel sorry for them. Like, I mean, in general, it's actually a very illustrative that Ukrainians being bombed and killed on daily basis feel happier and more proud about our country than Russians who are saying to the world they are the strongest, they are well off, but at the same time super miserable. And another reason that many people do not talk about is that in Ukraine, our government, our military forces, police were giving Ukrainian citizens weapons because they were needed when Russian tanks were close to the capital. And in Russia, they are not ready to give weapons to their people because they don't know what the consequences will be. Of course, in any country at war, some accidents may happen, but I know that it was really easy for Ukraine then to set these weapons on control, on list. Some time was given, but in a month or something, everything was fine. Please remember, everything happens in times of war that no one of us have ever experienced. But our government trusts Ukrainians, and Ukrainians do what the government expects. This is what is called a society. And in Russia, perhaps they will shoot each other after a good drink. So that's also an illustration and an explanation of the Russia's life now.
And in fact, I'm sure you've seen them. There are plenty of videos out there of people who've come back, you know, especially the not the kontratniki, but the zeki, the prisoners that have come back and then terrorized the villages that they go back to. They take guns, grenades, knives, and there have been numerous killings as a result. And I think they know that very well. They understand, on the one hand, random violence would just explode if they just gave everybody weapons. They absolutely know that. The other one, of course, is they're paranoid, and there's always the risk of some kind of not revolution, because that requires citizens and politics, an element of trust, which doesn't exist, but certainly like a mityej or a mutiny is certainly rising on the level of possibilities again. I will come to that in a minute, because I think that's a really important outcome, potentially a sort of unintended consequence of the incursions into Kursk. But let's just sort of top this topic out that we've talked about, because you talk about organization. and the extraordinary power that we've talked about so much on this channel about Ukraine civic society and the ability to organize and solve problems. It doesn't always work, but like any good entrepreneurialism, you know, if it doesn't work, you try another way, you innovate, you think up new ideas, and you just keep going until that problem is solved. And we see massive evidence of this in Ukraine. And I understand Vlad's point about depoliticization, but there's something worse, I think. There's something deeper. Before you depoliticize people, you have to do something else. You have to destroy their sense of trust in each other. Because that, you know, as soon as you start getting this trust building up in your population, that's when organic politics can start to happen. And that's when random anger and rage and discontent can turn into an organized approach, which is, of course, what the Russian leadership has always wanted to prevent at all costs. It strikes me that trust is the thing that their system is designed to destroy. And in that way, it's very much like the trolling activity that we were talking about earlier before we put the cameras on. To destroy trust, you need to inject doubt. You need to inject lies into every conversation, into every institution, into every social interaction. And I think that's something that's not quite understood, is the degree of poison that the Russian system needs to create to stop the basic building blocks of society emerging.
You are right. And I think that the majority of healthy democracies, countries, they are built from bottom up. When people unite in groups, then they shape some, I don't know, NGOs, then political parties, and so on. And in Russia, for centuries, they tried to build a society from the top. What we want from our serfs. That's the typical attitude. And of course, they in this modern world, they do understand that with the internet, people can have access to the information. For example, there are satellite images of the destroyed Russian air bases. And that's why the new strategy is to create multiple truths. And that's what Russian propagandists are working on. The creation of this image that, well, if you look from a different angle, from whatever angle you look at the destruction of the Children's Cancer Hospital, there is no explanation to that. And unfortunately, there are still people who are looking for multiple variants of the truth, and this can be very tricky and harmful, not just for the support of Ukraine, but also for your societies. And, you know, maybe even on your channel, we have discussed how can we protect ourselves from this very poisonous, very cunning technique. And my answer was to simply block Russian sources. It does not sound that like, maybe it sounds radical, but in reality, it is like saving us from a very dangerous disease that needs some quarantine. And you know, they know a lot about us. They observe our societies. They have specialists who are not thinking about what's happening inside Russia, but are looking for troubles in your countries, in my country, and trying to make them bigger, causing chaos. And of course, they have trolls for that. They have speaking heads. They buy intellectuals. They bribe politicians. And one of the main things is to understand that they have stopped operating something very primitive, like Ukraine has biolaboratories, because, okay, serious people, decision makers will not buy this. But they are trying to connect some problems to the support of Ukraine, which is not connected, and cause this, I hate this phrase, Ukraine fatigue. I often say, why don't you develop Russia fatigue? Because it's all Russia's fault. We were living our life peacefully. We had our troubles. We were not perfect, but we did not cause any troubles to Britain living an ordinary Ukrainian life, for example. We did not demand any support from the United States until Russia invaded us and we recollected, okay, guys, you de-armed us, so come on, please help us now. And that's it. So I do hope more and more people will speak about Russia fatigue, Putin fatigue. We'll finally stop being afraid of them. I had so many comments about this Kursk operation with people. How come Ukraine is so brave? Aren't you afraid of consequences? They will definitely shell Kyiv. First of all, we are brave. First I thought it's because we don't have a choice. But now looking at many countries around and how they react to hypothetical threats, I realize we are brave. Maybe because of our long and bad history with such neighbor. Second, everyone in Ukraine knows we will be shelled by Russia as long as this war continues and Putin is not in The Hague. This will happen whether we protect ourselves or not. Another important thing that many still do not understand, if all of us give up and sign treaty with Russia on Russia's terms, we will also die, but just silently. You won't witness that because my YouTube channel will be closed, something else will happen, and you will simply not see that. This is what happens now on these temporarily occupied territories. It's not about giving the land, soil, even though it's very important. It's about giving up on people who pray that you will come and liberate them, who are fighting, who are surviving. So stop being afraid of them, because once again, we know they targeted children's hospital. We were not in Kursk. They would do it anyway. So it is much better to get their territories, to have an exchange fund, to capture some of their soldiers to exchange for our heroes. That's the dynamics of war, and that's the demonstration of Russia's weakness. There are lots of memes, I'm sure you've enjoyed them, but this is the reality. And I pray and I hope that people will finally see that, how do you say, that the king is actually without the clothes.
That's been proved beyond any doubt in the last 2 weeks.
Yes, but this demonstrates how PR works. Many still oh, but what? They are in panic. They don't know what to do. Ukrainian troops control more of the Russian territory in 7 days than Russians killing perhaps 50,000 soldiers since the summer.
That's one of the extraordinary aspects of this. There's another incredible aspect of it, I think, which is less appreciated. And not only is Ukraine brave, it is also inventive. And that's what I find most interesting. It's the innovation, it's the invention, it's creating opportunities and possibilities where nobody else saw. You've mentioned there that people automatically restrict themselves through fear and through being coercively manipulated by Russian terror and threats. And that stops people being inventive. It stops them doing things that are unexpected. In fact, they behave in an expected way under that kind of pressure and coercion. And unfortunately, we sort of see this in the US administration. All through the war, I don't think the US, despite the huge quantities of aid they've provided, they have never broken out and gained the escalation initiative. Russia has always had the initiative up until now over what happens next and ratcheting up, the sort of terror and brutality. The US is always behind that, always encouraging and trying to coerce Ukraine into doing things that are predictable, manageable, controllable, and don't get too scary. Don't push Russia too far. Kursk breaks out of that dynamic. It says, look, we're going to do something where the consequences aren't clear. The US seems to want Ukraine to only do things where the consequences can be absolutely predicted and managed and understood. Whereas Ukraine here has done something to say, okay, well, we're going to go into Kursk. And we've got a couple of reasons why we think this is a good idea. But there may be lots and lots of other consequences to this, other opportunities that we cannot foresee. But we're not going to be afraid of that. We're going to grasp it and we're going to do it and we're going to see what comes out of it. This seems to me Ukraine has fundamentally grown out of, I would say, the timid Western partners and their sort of mindset towards Russia?
I hope so. I feel so. You are right. We are very grateful to our allies, and we realize that our fight is only possible because of this support. But what many forget is that Ukraine's investment in this defense is the largest because we give our people, we give our territories, and that's what we are losing every day. And we have to be creative if we want to survive. This attitude that we will support Ukraine as long as it takes is not something that Ukrainians like, because what? As long as it takes. If this war continues for 10, 15 years, we will simply die out. Russia is larger, and the only way to win this war and to save more Ukrainian people is actually to be innovative and to have some innovative technologies that can outstand Russia's. And another thing, I believe that more and more of Ukrainian military professionals become more confident in their decisions too, because they communicate a lot with the colleagues. And from what I hear locally, actually many of the US military people are more decisive than the US politicians. And I totally think that since the February 2022, there is no place for political decisions. There is only place for military decisions. And military decisions are never in this gray zone, how to do something, not to have consequences. They actually need very vivid results. Like, we are doing that, we want to get this territory. So I do not understand how come many people still treat Russia as a legitimate country, Putin as a politician that can be negotiated with. Having witnessed so many crimes, and not just against Ukraine, but this total disrespect to the international laws that actually keep your societies healthy and alive. Because if we will give birth to this reshaping of borders in Europe, believe me, it will cascade to other parts of the world. And it may not happen like this autumn or next spring, but in 10 years, in 15 years. Do you want your children to inherit this problem? No, it's vital. You know, Kursk is actually ethnically Ukrainian territory. And Sucha was the first big city occupied by Bolsheviks. And it's not Kharkiv that was the first capital of the USSR, but Sucha. It's all very symbolic. You've invited me for this Zoom conversation from Kursk to Kursk, and I was looking back at this tragedy that actually demonstrated the world who and what Putin was. And we have this, I know that this authoritarian regimes and Putin, they love symbolism, you know. He started his special military operation at the moment when the USSR was created, and then there are lots of symbolic things that he uses, choosing the dates and so on. And here it also looks very symbolic. The start of the Kursk operation, closing dates to the tragedy of the Kursk submarine. Now Suja, liberated by the Ukrainian Armed Forces, that was actually taken by Bolsheviks when Ukraine was an independent Ukraine's People Republic. And these 5 years of independence are super important for the survival of this Ukrainian spirit and our dream for independence. So hopefully this will give a start to some very serious processes inside the Russian Federation.
We can only hope. Well, we'll come to that in a minute, because I'm getting sort of Prigozhin mutiny vibes of what's happening now in Russia, which would be a good thing, actually, not necessarily for Russia, but it would be a good thing certainly for Ukraine, and short-circuiting the war, as it were, to come to a swift end. And we mentioned Kursk, and I rewatched some of the footage of the demonstrations and the sort of meetings that happened while the Kursk rescue operation was sort of being blocked by the Kremlin. And there's a famous piece of footage of a woman, the mother of one of the sailors who was on that submarine. And she's there. She's in this hall. Putin, as the sort of, gray apparatchik, is on the stage, and she's shouting, she's screaming at him, even using some abusive terms as well, but basically saying the truth, which is, you don't care about them, you don't care about their lives, you don't care about any of us. And that sort of outpouring of rage it's not politics, it's personal rage and anxiety all coming out. And then you see someone coming up, and it's important, I think, that it's a sort of woman agent of some sort comes up and injects her with something, and she passes out, and then they take this protester out of the hall. I think that's symbolic for what Putin's managed to do to the entire Russian population. In these 25 years, he has injected them with some sort of brain numbing kind of drug. Will they wake up, though? Will they wake up now the war is on their territory? And will that actually have any effect on their ability to organize, as you said earlier? I kind of have doubts about that in particular, but it might trigger other things, such as some kind of coup within the hierarchy or within the military. It seems very difficult to predict, but I think that's one of the unintended consequences of what Ukraine's done. And I think in authorizing this incursion into Russia, I think this is exactly the kind of chaos which they want to unleash in Russia, and it's absolutely the right thing to do.
You're right. I still do not have an answer to a question why we are so different with Russians, because we all had very bad years of like communism, the USSR, but still it was injected, just like this poor lady from Moscow, and it remained alien for Ukrainians. And the moment of the collapse of the USSR is celebrated in Ukraine. And people love this freedom that we got. Freedom brings no more responsibilities. And Russians, they choose stability, the thing that they are losing actually right now, but they were ready to trade freedom for this illusion of stability. Recently, we have discussed this Kursk operation with my editor-in-chief. She's a very smart lady and the head of the daily Ukrainian newspaper, author of many historical books. And she said one phrase that surprised me. She said, how come the West does not understand that the military defeat of Russia is the best thing that can happen to them? And actually the only thing that can help and prevent some chaotic collapse or something. Because this military defeat may lead to some healthier processes with the interference of other democracies and, for example, curing of Russia without any bloody revolutions and so on. But the world wants to preserve Russia under Putin. That's the greatest mistake, because indeed, at the start of his career, with this Kursk tragedy, he demonstrated he does not care about human life of his own people. I don't know if there is anything worse that a president, prime minister can demonstrate at the start. And it was not an operation that they could not get people or something. It was really simple to save these people. And they were dying an awful death just because Putin did not want to show what? That Russia is rotten and weak, because one of the main official reasons for the sinking of this submarine is that it was rusty and it came in blah, 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 and so on. I'm not a specialist, but there were lots of ways to ask foreign support, people who were close to them, but they denied it, sacrificed human lives. They were dying awfully, and they were literally dying online. I remember that on TV. I was still at school, but I felt really bad because it was close to my birthday, and I felt like, oh, I don't want them to die. I feel so bad. It was everywhere. And I felt bad. And I'm sure millions of people around the world felt bad. And if we had an option, we would definitely try and save them. But he chose not to. And already in 2000, he demonstrated what he is. And that's why I also think that this complete, very vivid military defeat of Russia can actually save Russia, as it happened to Germany. Now it is one of the most democratic countries, an example of a healthy society, healthy economy.
And it's an interesting point you make about really, the lack of society. We're starting to see retreating Russian troops actually looting the houses of people who fled. We see no serious attempt at evacuating many of the people from the territory of Kursk. They are now starting to do that in Belgorod. And that's kind of an interesting process as well, because it suggests the Ukrainian operation is not just, as some in the Western media have called it, a raid. It's quite clearly, not on that scale. It's far, far more significant than that. But Russia is already looking at Belgorod, Bryansk, and possibly other regions to evacuate. And someone made a really important point on a recent video. Not just does this create sort of anxiety and it really brings the war home. So you've got all this chaos, you've got the anxiety it's causing, and I think this is important psychologically to bring the war home and to undermine the idea that Putin is the guardian of security of the people, the protector. In essence, he's really the wolf in charge of the sheep. People are starting to realize that that's important. But Western Russia is also economically important. And this really hasn't been addressed. The huge dislocation of agriculture, industry, economy, logistics. We're starting to see disruptions to the Western Russian rail network. I think that's an impact of what Ukraine is doing here that has not really been explored and discussed much, but it could be incredibly significant. And we also know that the Russian economy is in a shockingly bad state. Both China and Turkey are really ceasing to do financial transactions, provide credit to Russia under the pressure of secondary sanctions. So this is just this is the straw that may break the camel's back, as they say.
Well, Russia's allies demonstrate it's nothing personal, it's just business. And, specifically with authoritarian regimes that do not demonstrate much love and respect to human values, it's really easier to betreat each other. Because in the democratic world, apart from financial things or, I don't know, educational, cultural things, we are bind with some moral, spiritual things when you really feel bad about something bad happening elsewhere. And in country bullies, they kind of allow that, and whenever they see someone is getting weaker, they are ready to give up on that. So we do see some of such symptoms, especially after the secondary sanctions to China. It happened really quickly. And at the same time, what surprised me, Jonathan, and I would like more of people to know, is that so many people in these agricultural Russian regions in Kursk speak Ukrainian. Ukrainian soldiers were talking to these old ladies and they were speaking what they say Kursk dialect. It is a pure Ukrainian language because it was preserved there, because this was the Ukrainian land. And I even think that they have good agriculture there because they have some remains of Ukrainian farmers there who were taken away from their identity was taken away. But there are some things that we in Ukraine we have the saying, like the voice of your blood, something that you cannot silence. And of course, these are very serious processes happening. We've experienced that in Ukraine, and the relocation of people is a very difficult process. It's extremely economically complicated. People leave their houses. People need to be protected. They need to find shelters. Then you don't know for how long they will stay in the shelters under stress. They have lots of health issues and other things. But there is a huge difference between the way we treat our people in Ukraine people cared about the survival of cats, in the destroyed houses. I am not sure that this process will be that kind even to people in Kursk, Belgorod, Bryansk, Voronezh, and more regions. Because in Russia, once again, with this authoritarian approach, they don't care about life of separate people, and they may simply abandon them. Many people attracted attention to Putin's reaction during the very first day to the Kursk operation, and many feared that this will lead to the usage of the tactical nuclear weapons. And in reality, he simply gave the equivalent of $100 to the families that had to leave their houses, which is pathetic, and it won't help these people to survive. And this is the level how they care about these people. I'm sure in a couple of weeks, they will get angry at these people. They will say, why didn't you protect? They won't care about them. They will be like, first of all, they have lost this labor, manpower on the territory. I don't know what will happen to those fields and harvests. I'm sure we will not do anything bad to it, but not, first of all, Russia loses with people on the territories. They are not working, they are not eating, they are not paying anymore. But second, they will be a huge burden for them. And I'm not sure how will they get rid of them. Because once again, in authoritarian societies, everything is possible. I doubt they will care about the children, the elderly.
No, of course not. They'll be left behind, and there'll be no support. We see that, and we've seen. One can say that maybe this is sort of propaganda footage, etc. But we have seen Ukrainian troops already rescuing people from their basements, people who are running low on food, and starting to provide that. People who can't get access to medicine. There are stories about the Ukrainian army actually helping people in the territories they've liberated.
I'm sure this is happening because we are not a nation filled with hatred and anger. Many describe Ukraine as an agricultural nation. I think we're more than that. But you know that there is something specific about the nation that decided to invade, that decided to cross the border, cross all the red lines. This is actually like those wild animals who have tasted the human blood. Sometimes you have to neutralize them. And this is what one Russia is. And Ukraine is different. We are constantly in the position of defense, even if it is on the side of Russia. We simply do not want them to continue shelling us. You know that, for example, Kursk borders Ukrainian Sumy region. And since the start of summer, there was more than 1,000 hits on Sumy region from Kursk. 250 guided bombs, 100 missiles in one region. So is it logical that the Ukrainian armed forces want to move Russian missiles systems further from Sumy and let people live, let people grow their harvests, go to school, and so on? That's the reason why we, if you want to say, invade Russia, to return back to our borders and our life. And Russia did it with a totally different purpose. That's why I don't worry about how Ukrainian soldiers will treat Russians. I'm sure they will treat them better than Russian soldiers.
And there's something else I think we're going to have to tackle. This is why I feel that even when the war ends, and even if there is a full victory with reparations and everything that we talk about, the job is not yet done, because there are many experts in the West, pundits, experts, Russianists as well, who almost by instinct, they're able to craft ideas which sound plausible, which they can put into language which is, sophisticated, compelling, etc. But when you pick apart their ideas, really they're reflecting not reality, but the kind of reality that Russian propaganda would like you to believe and think. And I saw a particularly interesting one this week. It's by someone who's done some interesting commentary throughout the war, but occasionally, like a steering wheel that just has a slight imperfection and veers to one side, and you have to constantly correct it. I detect in this particular person, and he's obviously one of these Russian experts, expert on Russian history, etc. And he basically said, "Oh well, Ukraine's making success in Kursk. It's fantastic. It's incredible. But," and there's always a but. They always put this, inject some kind of negative idea into it. He said, "But what Zelenskyy is doing here is extremely risky. It's a risky gamble. We know it probably is. And it could really divide the political landscape. If it goes wrong, it's going to poison the political landscape. Ukrainians are going to be arguing and attacking their leaders." And I thought, this just did not sound at all correct to me. And to, in the context of the conversations we're having, it's either an interpretation based on actual propaganda and what Russia would like to inject into the conversation, or more specifically, he may just be, instinctively placing assumptions on Ukraine based on his understanding of Western societies or Russian society, and trying to think that, okay, well, that will work in Ukraine as well. So let's come up with this idea, and it sounds plausible. In your view, is everyone really behind Zelenskyy? The mood has changed. Do most Ukrainians support the bold action that has been taken in Kursk?
Especially if we talk about Kursk operation, because once again, as a democratic society, Ukraine has lots of questions and requests and dissatisfaction with Zelenskyy, with deputies, with ministers, but that's a sign of a healthy society. These are not bad things. These are healthy things that help maintain that democratic processes in the country. I will be brutally honest with you. I think you, your channel, and a few others are unique because you have a history with Russia, with this part of the world. You are able to read, to watch, you've experienced that with your own skin. But there are so many experts who know nothing about this part of the world. And I'm not a philosopher, I'm not an economist, but I was born here. I remember the times of the collapse of the USSR. I was a child, but I have my child associations. And I know this kind of mindset. I know how different it is from mine, but I can feel it, just as you can feel better, I don't know, some Scotland and Ireland. There are some things that, for example, I always hate when Ukrainian scholars analyze Shakespeare and want to persuade they feel something more than the native English speakers. And the same I often feel about the experts who judge Russia as if it was Denmark or as if it was France, and they ascribe Russians this kind of reactions, this kind of attitudes, when they live on a totally different planet. I know that I can reason nothing about China because I have no idea how they feel, how they react, how they congratulate each other with birthday. And it's actually these minor details, your lifestyle, the way you celebrate, the way you mourn, that tell and make up the nation. And that's why when I hear about some of the potential reactions that experts think will come from the Russian side, I read, guys, no way, it's totally different. That's why I think that we may speak about versions, but people who have never experienced Russia like me or like you cannot make very assumptions very confidently. Because Russians are very, very, very different. I will tell you that just like there are fewer differences between me and you than between an average Russian. In the way we want to live, want to travel, want to eat, want to watch, want to vote. And it's actually what makes us a nation. And Russians, what is bad for you is good for them. They choose stability over freedom. They feel totally okay about having one president in 30 years. They do not object to many things that would be impossible for a European, let's say, to survive. And that's why assumptions built on this totally wrong image of this part of the world plays a bad trick with people. And I already feel how different, let's say, parts of Europe are, and how differently they react, for example, to Kursk operation. I won't name the regions, but some are terrified, saying like, how can you be so brave? But this is insane. They will destroy you. Others are saying, come on, move to Moscow. Why are you stopping? And it is very much programmed by our mindset, by our cultural practices. That's why I think you cannot. And this is actually one of the reasons why the world rediscovered Ukraine since the start of the Russia's invasion, because for decades, if not centuries, in the mindsets of many Europeans, North Americans, Africans, Australians, we were the same people, acting similarly in similar conditions, but we're not. You see it on protests, Maidan. I have illustrated that how Ukrainian people were standing for the ones arrested and liberated them. Now you've seen that in the days of invasion of Ukraine, the very first, and what we watch now in Kursk. This demonstrates huge differences in the way people react. And that's why I often smile when I listen to the experts who are too far away from the way Russians, or unfortunately previously occupied by the Soviet Union people, lived, or especially when they tell me how I felt, how was my life, and you no, it was not like, no, and that was, no, that was different. So I think it's extremely important to ask more questions, to watch carefully, and to finally start seeing these differences, take away this fog from this Eastern Europe, and start seeing the differences. All Ukrainians are not just happy. I'd say they are in love with Kursk operation. There are no doubts. I will tell you, some say, but people will die, like soldiers. Of course, that's war, and those who cross the borders, there are some losses. But there are losses of Ukrainians in trenches who stay there for months, protecting a small village in Ukraine, and they are very demotivated. And here, they are changing history. They are humiliating, and they take away the mask from the nuclear state. They are giving a chance. They feel themselves like they have a mission. And those who survive, those who achieve, those who learn, become super professionals, and they perhaps open a new level in their brain of bravery, of operational experience. And this is an extremely important historical moment for the Ukrainian armed forces and for Ukraine. Imagine, Putin said he started his special military operation to prevent Ukraine's attack on Russia, which we never planned. But after 2.5 years of his successful military operation, we invaded. Everything went wrong for him, and only the blind won't see it. So I'm very grateful for your channel in particular, because you collect people, including Russian representatives, Russian opposition, that speak for this part of the world. And it's important not to build your assumption based on your own culture, but to let people from that land speak, because they have a different mindset. I know that Scandinavian people are different from, let's say, Southern European, and North Americans are now similar. That's beautiful. That's what makes our world diverse. But Russians are different, and Ukrainians are different. And just have a look at the history of presidents and how long they ruled in Ukraine and in Russia, and he will tell you a lot.
Such a strong statement there, and to sort of close out, so I think, this conversation, and from Kursk to Kursk, it does feel like this extraordinary historical cycle that is returning back almost in a loop. And there's that phrase, isn't there? Sow the wind, reap the whirlwind. And this is exactly what Putin's done. Everything he wanted to achieve, every conquest, domination he wanted to make, every threat that he uttered, every single one of them is reversing and coming back and demonstrating his absolute failure. But we can go back to the start of his regime and the seeds of that failure, the evidence that he is really incompetent and brutal. They were there right from the start, but they were ignored. What would be your message to the US, which still exudes extraordinary caution? What would you say to them to support Ukraine and to give Ukraine what it needs, and lift those red lines and barriers and stop being afraid of Russia and allow Ukraine to do what it has to do here in this incredible Kursk operation? How would you persuade them to stop their fear limiting their actions?
I speak about that a lot. And I think we should switch the focus from Ukraine to Russia. Ukraine should not be a problem. It's not about happening in Ukraine, helping Ukraine, Ukraine needs. It's about Russia. It's important to look at the abuser, at the aggressor. And after Russia has crossed these red lines, it cannot be a part of the global society. No one is safe with Putin as the president of Russia, with Putin in control of nuclear weapons. No country, and I'm not saying just about Ukraine, the Baltic, or Poland, I mean everywhere in the world. And Russia has demonstrated it conducts lots of hybrid wars in Africa, maybe even in the United States. So the desire has to be not to help Ukraine or Poland or Mars, but to defeat modern Russia and to realize that the defeat of the modern Russian regime is actually the way to save this part of the world and to prevent more serious problems, including this further degradation of Russian population, their fascization, or whatever. We don't want North Korea to be that big. So I hope this will, and once again, if you have this not political but military will, you start making military decisions and you stop saying we will support Ukraine as long as it takes, and we concentrate on how we defeat Russia and what can be treated as Russia's defeat. And then, if you're afraid of the collapse and dissolution of Russia, we can discuss how do we control this process? How do we help Russian people become more democratic? How do we de-zombify them and actually save this part of the world? It's not about Ukraine. It was Georgia in 2008. It was 2014, 2022 in Ukraine. Russia interferes in many other countries. Russia causes lots of troubles, and it also inspires other authoritarian regimes. So I, as a Ukrainian, would like to take the focus away. It's not about helping Ukraine. It's about defeating evil in Russia. And if you are very kind and very tolerant, it is also about the saving and liberating of the Russian people who live in really bad conditions because of this authoritarian regime that becomes stronger and stronger and more dangerous with each day.
Well, Anna, I think we've shed some extraordinary light on this topic and hopefully dispelled any doubts about the unity in Ukraine behind this very imaginative, brave and bold Kursk action, because things are moving so fast Oh, yes, you're going to
I
jump in
will
and
tell
say
you
something.
more to demonstrate you the level of support in Ukraine. There are lots of memes and jokes. One says that, come on, boys, there are only two more regions to Moscow. You can do it. Just like, bro. Another one is just Zelenskyy showing angry Zelenskyy who says, but I've told you take Crimea, not Kremlin. What have you done? What shall we say to our partners now? And honestly, with some confident support, I think that would be possible. So people definitely stand for that in Ukraine. I think if it would be more difficult to maintain good morale if similar operations did not happen. So definitely, this does not divide the Ukrainian society; it unites it.
That's such an important point to make. I'm so glad we're able to sort of capture that in such a forceful and passionate way in today's conversation. Anna, I know you had a birthday earlier this week, so I wanted to say here, happy birthday then. I hope
Thank you.
you had a fantastic day. And it's always great speaking. Given that events are moving, actually accelerating incredibly fast, I know we waited a couple of weeks for this one, but I'm sure we'll have masses to discuss in a couple of weeks' time. Let's do that. Let's organize more panels as well, because I think that's a very powerful format. But for today, thanks so much for appearing on the channel.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, and a beautiful community of your channel. I'm very grateful that you support us, that you want to know more about Ukraine, and that you want to see more of the Russian regions liberated.